While filming for Rocky IV, Sylvester Stallone challenged Dolph Lundgren to try to knock him out for real. Lundgren hit him so hard that he was sent to the ICU for 9 days and was lucky to survive. The Cordoba fighting dog was a dog breed that became so aggressive that it was very difficult to breed them, since a pair would often fight to the death rather than mate. This eventually contributed to their extinction before the 20th century. This photo from 1960 shows segregationists harassing 6-year-old Ruby Bridges, the first black child to attend an all-white school. They portrayed her as a doll laying in a coffin to protest her attendance at the school. Chester the Molester was a comic strip by Dwayne Tinsley that featured a pedophile named Chester who was interested in molesting young girls. After producing the comic strip for 13 years, Tinsley was convicted of molesting his teenage daughter Allison over a 5-year span. Former WWE wrestler Chris Benoit is considered to be one of the most talented professional wrestlers of all time. But sadly, his career was tainted when the 40-year-old murdered his wife and son before taking his own life in 2007. After multiple tests were conducted, it was revealed that his brain was so damaged from wrestling that he had the brain of an 85-year-old with an advanced form of dementia, likely contributing to his horrific behavior. In 2012, a UK surgeon was fired and convicted of assault after branding his initials into the livers of 2 of his patients. It was only discovered when another surgeon had to perform a corrective surgery on one of the patients. In 2013, Florida man Jeff Bush was sleeping in his bedroom when a sinkhole opened up beneath him and swallowed him whole. His brother heard his screams from across the house and immediately ran over to start digging, but Jeff's body was never recovered. Frank Lentini was a circus performer in the early 1900s who was born with a parasitic twin. This resulted in him having 3 legs, 4 feet, 16 toes, and yes, 2 sets of functioning genitals. He married, had 4 kids, and lived to the age of 78. Here's a clip of Admiral Jeremiah Denton blinking the word torture in Morse code while he was held captive in the Vietnam War. He was being filmed for Vietnamese propaganda, but U.S. naval intelligence was able to decipher his message. In 1979, gold miners in Alaska stumbled upon this perfectly preserved steppe bison that's right around 50,000 years old. It was so incredibly intact that researchers decided to take a chunk of muscle from its neck and cook it into a meal. It was described as tough like beef jerky, but quite delicious aside from the muddy aftertaste. Paul McCartney decided not to tell his wife Linda that her cancer progressed and had become terminal. He didn't think it would do her any good if she knew, so she continued riding her horse until the day before she died. These were just some of the wedding rings that were taken from victims of Buchenwald concentration camp during the Holocaust. It's estimated that around 100,000 Japanese people vanish without a trace every year. Many of these cases are people simply trying to save their honor after a divorce, job loss, or a failed exam. After the 1947 murder of Elizabeth Short, aka Black Dahlia, reporters told her mother that Elizabeth had just taken first place in a beauty contest. Once they had enough information from her for their story, they informed Mrs. Short that her daughter had actually been viciously murdered. This one made me puke. A female orangutan named Pony was used as a sex slave in a village on the Asian island of Borneo. She was shaved and chained to a bed daily, and whenever a man approached her, she would automatically assume a submissive position. In 1965, a device was patented to deliver a baby using centrifugal force. The machine would spin around until the baby popped out, which would then be caught in a net. An armadillo's armor is so tough that a Texas man once shot at one on his property and the bullet ricocheted back, hitting the man in the face. In 1951, New Zealand author Janet Frame was diagnosed with schizophrenia and was scheduled for a lobotomy. But just days before the operation, she won New Zealand's most prestigious literary award, prompting doctors to cancel the operation that would mash her brain. There's a blue whale that sings at such high frequencies that he's unable to communicate with other whales. Nicknamed 52 Blue, his calls have been heard since the 1980s but never receive a response. Waist chopping was a popular execution method in ancient China that involved sawing the body clean in half. But it was banned in 1734 after a Chinese official was cut in half and still managed to write the Chinese word for awful 7 times in his own blood. In 2005, one sheep decided to jump off a cliff, causing 1,500 others to follow. But only the first 450 actually died, since the rest of the falls were cushioned by the dead bodies below. The Great Whiskey Fire of Dublin killed 13 people in 1875, but none of them died from the actual fire. They were all killed by alcohol poisoning after drinking too much of the whiskey pouring through the streets. When former NFL safety Dave Dworson took his own life in 2011, he left a note that read, "Please see that my brain is given to the NFL's brain bank." He shot himself in the chest so that his brain would be preserved, and doctors confirmed he was suffering from severe CTE. In 2007, children going to see The Last Mimsy at a movie theater in Florida were accidentally shown The Hills Have Eyes 2 instead, the opening scene of which features a chained naked woman giving birth to a deformed baby. The theater apologized for the trauma and gave all the parents free tickets. In 1971, a Texas state representative introduced a bill that honored a serial killer for his work in population control. He did this simply to prove that most of his colleagues passed bills without even reading them. And he was correct, since it was passed unanimously. This coffin-like capsule will allow people to end their own lives by lowering the oxygen level to 1% within 5 minutes. The creators of this pod are seeking approval for legal use in Switzerland, claiming that it will give people the option to go out peacefully and comfortably. When the Nazi Party held its first book burning, one of the works destroyed was a 1921 play by Heinrich Heine. It contained the famous phrase, "Where they burn books, they will also, in the end, burn people." In August of 2001, actor James Woods reported 4 suspicious men on his flight, but authorities didn't take his claims seriously. Turns out there were 4 of the hijackers who had crashed into the World Trade Center on 9/11, and this was one of their test runs. In 1959, a white man named John Howard Griffin disguised himself as a black man and traveled through the Deep South for 6 weeks. After writing a book about his experiences with racism, he was forced to move to Mexico for several years due to the barrage of death threats. Albert Einstein died at the age of 76 after refusing to undergo surgery on his heart. He was quoted saying, "I want to go when I want. It is tasteless to prolong life artificially. I have done my share, it's time to go. I will do so elegantly." In September of 1974, 18-year-old Milika Kostic was lured to a 12th-floor apartment by 5 men who attempted to assault her. When given the chance, she decided to jump from the apartment window and fell about 120 feet onto a cafe awning below. She died 2 days later, but was conscious for long enough to give police a full description of the awful incident. This pic shows Thomas Whitaker on the right celebrating his college graduation with his mom Patricia and brother Kevin. But in reality, Thomas flunked out of school and devised a plan so that his family would never find out. When they returned home the same night this photo was taken, a gunman hired by Thomas ambushed the family, killing Kevin and Patricia and wounding the father Ken. Thomas was initially sentenced to death for the 2 murders, but in 2018 he was spared just 40 minutes before his execution. Turns out his father forgave him and requested for his only remaining family member to not be executed. In 1991, Nigerian prophet Daniel Abadunrin apparently wanted to recreate the story of Daniel in the Bible, so he broke into a lion cage at the zoo with the belief that God wouldn't allow them to open their mouths. But as soon as the lions saw Daniel, they tore him to shreds. Back in June, a 3-year-old boy named Riker Webb wandered off from his family's yard in Montana and went missing in the wilderness for 2 days. This photo was taken when he was miraculously found alive in a shed more than 2 miles away from his home. Authorities say he was extremely lucky, considering the valley he was found in is riddled with mountain lions and bears. In the heat of COVID, an Asian man was arrested for training his pit bull to drop bricks on people who rang his doorbell. Attack of the Dead Men was a World War I battle during which the Germans bombarded the Russians with a mixture of poisonous gases. The effects were so devastating that the Russians coughed up pieces of their own organs and their skin started dissolving. The zombie-like appearance was so horrifying to the 7,000 Germans that they gave up the battle and ran. This photo of Sean and Michael McQuilkin was taken at Sequoia National Park just seconds before they were struck by lightning in 1975. All 3, including their photographer sister, survived the strike, but younger brother Sean suffered 3rd-degree burns and spent nearly 6 months in a coma. After being unable to overcome the physical and mental toll of the incident, Sean sadly ended up taking his own life in 1989. After having an allergic reaction to asthma medicine in 2009, Tennessee woman Shanina Isom has been suffering from a mysterious skin condition that causes her to grow fingernails in place of her hair. In 2004, 200 women armed with kitchen knives stormed into an Indian courthouse before stabbing and murdering Akuya Dav, a gang leader, serial killer, and who kept escaping his sentencing due to bribes. Every single woman later claimed responsibility for killing him. When a predatory producer assaulted one of her friends, Carrie Fisher sent him a Tiffany box with a severed cow tongue inside. She also left a note inside that read, "The next delivery will be something of yours in a much smaller box." When Britain changed the packaging of Tylenol to blister packs instead of bottles, the rate from Tylenol declined by nearly 50%. Anyone who wanted a lethal dose of 50 pills now had to push them out one by one instead of easily dumping them out from a bottle. In 2013, a 60-year-old Japanese truck driver found out he was accidentally switched at birth in a Tokyo hospital in 1953. His biological parents were very wealthy, and the infant who took his place grew up to own a successful real estate company. Meanwhile, the original son was raised by a poor single mother and struggled with poverty throughout his entire life. Short-faced bear was once the most abundant bear in all of North America until it went extinct around 11,000 BC. Some scientists argue that these massive bears delayed human migration into North America because they kept killing men trying to cross the Bering Strait. Heart Attack Grill is a restaurant in Las Vegas where customers over 350 pounds eat for free. The only vegan option on the menu is cigarettes, and up to 3 people have died from heart attacks while eating there. In 1940, Walt Disney hired 11 little people to dress up as Pinocchio and wave to people at the movie's premiere. He left them on a theater balcony with enough food and wine for the day, but there was no way for them to get down. By late afternoon, they had all taken off their thick, sweaty costumes and were naked, drunk, and swearing at parents and their children. For 24 years, Missouri woman Dee Dee Blanchard pretended that her daughter Gypsy had multiple chronic conditions. She claimed her daughter suffered from leukemia, asthma, muscular dystrophy, and had the mental capacity of a 7-year-old. Dee Dee forced her to stay in a wheelchair and act disabled, subjecting her to many unnecessary surgeries and medications. Gypsy was often fed through a feeding tube and supplied air through an oxygen tank. Her mother also regularly shaved the girl's head to give her the appearance of a cancer patient. Whenever Gypsy suggested that she wasn't actually sick, her mother would physically harm her. In 2015, Gypsy was finally tired of her mother's horrific abuse and sent her boyfriend to stab Dee Dee 17 times in the back. Today, Gypsy is still serving out her 10-year sentence after pleading guilty to second-degree murder of her abusive mother.